My sister has always believed she understands power better than I do, not because she's smarter, but because she's louder. I've been in the military for over a decade. I've worn the uniform past every background check and stayed employed in a system that quietly removes people who can't follow rules. None of that ever impressed her. In her mind, real success is visible. It's promotions you can announce at dinner, titles you can put on LinkedIn, houses with open floor plans and kitchens bigger than my entire apartment. My career didn't look like that from the outside. On paper, I was mid-level, government salary, no flashy rank, no stories I could tell without stopping myself halfway through the sentence. When relatives asked what I did, I gave the same answer every time. I work for the Department of Defense. Administrative and analytical. Nothing exciting. People usually nodded and moved on. My sister never did. She'd tilt her head and smile the way people do when they think they're being polite, but are actually being cruel. Then she'd ask follow-up questions. Why didn't I ever talk about my job? Why did I still rent? Why did I drive the same car I'd had for years? Why did I disappear for weeks at a time and come back acting like nothing happened? I learned early that silence bothered her more than any answer I could give. We grew up in the same house, but we didn't grow up the same way. She learned how to dominate conversations. I learned how to listen. She learned how to make herself important in a room. I learned how to stay invisible. Those skills age very differently. At family gatherings, she liked to perform concern. She'd lean across the table and say things like, "I just worry about you. You're so private. That can't be healthy." Everyone would nod because on the surface it sounded kind. But there was always an audience, and she never said it when we were alone. I stopped trying to defend myself years ago. Defending yourself invites debate. Debate invites judgment. And judgment was her favorite hobby. The truth was simple. I liked my life. It was quiet, predictable on the outside, structured in a way that kept things moving forward without drama. I didn't need validation from people who measured worth by square footage and dinner reservations. But my sister couldn't stand that I wasn't playing the same game. The breaking point didn't come during an argument. It came during a routine family dinner that wasn't supposed to matter. It was my father's birthday. Nothing dramatic. Just food, drinks, and the usual rotation of relatives pretending to like each other. I arrived late, which didn't help. She noticed immediately. "You're always late," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Is that a military thing, or just you?" I said traffic. She laughed like I'd told a joke. Dinner moved on. Conversations split off. People talked about work, kids, money. When it was my turn, I kept it short. Same answers, same neutral tone. I could feel her watching me, waiting for a crack. Eventually, she got bored of waiting. So she said, setting her glass down, "What exactly do you do now? You've been with the government forever, but you never move up." I don't get it. The table went quiet in that way that means everyone is listening, but pretending they aren't. I said what I always said. I do my job. I like it. It pays the bills. She shook her head. That's not an answer. I shrugged. It's the only one I'm allowed to give. That word allowed landed wrong. Her smile tightened. Allowed by who? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The silence did what it always did. It made her uncomfortable. She pushed harder. You know, when people are this secretive, it usually means something's off. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just saying it's strange. There it was. Not an accusation. Just a suggestion planted where everyone could hear it. I looked around the table. No one defended me. No one challenged her. They just watched, curious. I realized in that moment that she wasn't worried about me at all. She was annoyed that I existed outside her understanding. After dinner, she cornered me near the kitchen. No audience this time. Her voice dropped. "I'm serious," she said. "You disappear. You don't explain. You don't share. That's not normal." "It is for me," I said. She crossed her arms. "You think you're better than us." I almost laughed. That accusation always comes from people who assume silence equals superiority. "No," I said. "I think we want different things." She stared at me like I'd insulted her. "Different things," she repeated. "You barely have a life. You work some government job, you avoid everyone, and you expect us not to ask questions." I told her I didn't expect anything. That was true. What I didn't say was that the military had taught me something she never learned. Not every question deserves an answer. And not every relationship is built on honesty. Some are built on control. She leaned closer. If you don't have anything to hide, why hide it? I looked at her then. Really looked. At the confidence, the certainty, the belief that she had the right to know everything about me simply because we shared DNA. I'm not hiding, I said. I'm doing my job. She scoffed. That's what people say right before things fall apart. I walked away before the conversation could get uglier. I'd learned that lesson too. Know when to exit. Know when staying silent is safer than being right. At the time, I thought that was the end of it. Just another uncomfortable family moment that would fade into the background like all the others. I went back to my apartment, back to my routine, back to a job that didn't care about my sister's opinions. What I didn't know was that she didn't walk away from that conversation the way I did. She took it as a challenge, and in her mind, challenges don't get resolved quietly. They get escalated. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and left it there while I poured coffee, choosing not to check the missed call notification that had already buzzed twice. By the time I picked it up, there were 3 texts from my sister. None of them asked how I was doing. All of them asked where I'd been. I answered with the same restraint I used at work. Out of town. Back now. Busy week. That should have been enough. It never was. Her reply came fast. Out of town, where for work. Which office I watched the dots appear and disappear, then appear again. She wasn't asking to understand. She was inventorying gaps. At work, I moved through the day the way I always did. Badge in, desk, screens, meetings that didn't leave paper trails, conversations that ended as soon as they began. The job rewards people who don't linger. I learned to do what needed doing and then stop. No commentary, no editorializing. It kept things clean. My sister thrived on mess. She started showing up in my life in small, irritating ways. A message asking if I was home because she was in the area. A photo of my car taken from across the street with a caption that said, "Still driving this thing," a forwarded article about government employees and burnout as if she'd diagnosed me through a headline. When I didn't respond, she escalated. She called our mother, then our aunt, then a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. I didn't hear about most of it directly. It came back to me sideways, filtered through concern and gossip. People asking if everything was okay, if I was under stress, if I needed help. Help in my family usually meant supervision. At a Sunday lunch I hadn't planned to attend, she made her move. I arrived late again. She was already seated, already mid-story. I caught my name in the air as I walked in. I'm not saying she's doing anything wrong. She was saying hands wrapped around a glass she hadn't touched. I'm just saying it's strange. She's gone a lot. She doesn't tell anyone where. And her lifestyle doesn't exactly match what she says she earns. I didn't interrupt. Interrupting gives people what they want. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "There she is," she said. Perfect timing. I sat down, asked for water, waited. She leaned in, lowering her voice like she was doing me a favor. "People worry," she said. "That's all." "I'm not asking them to," I said. "That's part of the problem," she replied. "You don't ask. You don't share. You just expect everyone to trust you." Trust. She used the word like a tool. I asked her what she was actually concerned about. She didn't answer right away. She looked around the table, checking the room, gauging interest. Then she said it. "People in government get compromised," she said. "It happens all the time. Debt, stress, foreign contacts. I read about it." I took a sip of water. Cold, clean. "Are you accusing me of something?" She shook her head quickly. "No. I'm saying I don't know. And that's what worries me." Not knowing bothered her more than anything else. It meant she couldn't manage the story. After lunch, she followed me to my car. She stood too close, like proximity could force honesty out of me. "If there's something you're dealing with," she said, "you should tell someone. You shouldn't be alone with it." "I'm not alone," I said. "I just don't need an audience." She laughed. "You always talk like you're above this." I got in my car and closed the door before the conversation could stretch into something worse. In the rearview mirror, I saw her standing there, arms crossed, watching me leave like I'd taken something that belonged to her. The next week, things shifted. She stopped asking questions directly. The messages changed tone. Less curiosity. More certainty. She started telling me things instead of asking. You're stressed. You're overworked. You're probably not thinking clearly. I recognized the move. When people can't get answers, they start writing conclusions. She sent me a screenshot of my own LinkedIn profile with my job title circled. Still says the same thing. No update in years. That's not normal. I didn't reply. Then she sent another message. I looked it up. Your pay grade doesn't cover your rent. That one landed differently. Not because it was accurate, because it told me she'd started doing math. I deleted the message and went back to what I was doing. At work, you don't react to noise. You assess whether it's relevant. Her assumptions weren't. Her behavior was. I adjusted small things, changed routines, took a different route home. Nothing dramatic, just enough to reduce visibility. It wasn't fear, it was maintenance. She noticed anyway. You're avoiding me, she said over the phone one night. No greeting. No context. I've been busy, I said. With what? Work. She sighed, heavy and theatrical. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Silence. Then her voice dropped. Calm. Focused. The version she used when she thought she was being reasonable. You know I could help, she said. If something's wrong, nothing's wrong. That's what worries me, she replied. If everything's fine, why does it feel like you're hiding? I ended the call. The next day, my mother called. She asked if I was okay. I told her yes. She asked if I was sure. I told her I was at work and had to go. She sounded disappointed, like she'd been hoping for something more dramatic. At the end of the week, my sister sent one last message. I just want to make sure you're safe. If you won't talk to me, I might need to talk to someone who can. I read it twice. The wording was careful, vague enough to sound caring, specific enough to be a warning. I didn't respond. I locked my phone, finished my report, logged out. That night I stood at my kitchen sink longer than necessary, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, thinking through the problem the way I always did. Identify the variables, remove emotion, decide what mattered. My sister wasn't dangerous because she was angry. She was dangerous because she believed she was entitled to answers I couldn't give. And people who believe that don't stop asking. They look for others' doors. I clicked the lock on my apartment door and stood there for a second longer than usual. Keys still in my hand, listening to the hallway settle back into its normal silence. On the kitchen table, my phone lit up again. Same sender, no subject. Just a link this time. It was an article from a mainstream news site about insider threats in federal agencies. Nothing sensational. Quotes from former officials. A checklist of warning signs. Unexplained travel. Financial inconsistencies. Behavioral withdrawal. I read it once then again, not because it was new, but because I recognized the language. It wasn't written for families. It was written for systems. Her message underneath was short. This is what I'm talking about. I didn't respond. I made dinner. I ate standing up. I rinsed the plate and set it in the rack. Normal actions have a way of grounding you when other people are trying to invent narratives. The next morning at work, nothing was out of place. Same badge scan. Same nod from security. Same unremarkable email traffic. If anything had already been set in motion, it hadn't reached my lane yet. That didn't mean it wouldn't. By lunch, my sister had shifted tactics again. She called me from an unknown number. I answered without thinking, then immediately regretted it. I didn't want to scare you, she said. But I talked to someone. I closed my office door. Who? A friend of a friend, she replied. Someone who understands how these things work. Things I said. Government things. That was when I understood she wasn't bluffing. She talked fast after that, like she was afraid if she slowed down, I'd interrupt. She said words like concern and responsibility. She said it wasn't about punishment, just clarification. She said if everything was legitimate, there was nothing to worry about. I told her to stop. You don't get to decide that she said. If there's even a chance something's wrong, someone has to say something. Someone, I said. Or you. She didn't answer. That told me enough. After the call ended, I sat back in my chair and stared at the blank screen in front of me. I wasn't angry. Anger wastes time. I was irritated in a very specific way, the way you get when someone who doesn't understand a system decides to test it. People like my sister assume the Pentagon works like customer service. You file a complaint. Someone looks into it. Worst case, there's a slap on the wrist and a lot of paperwork. They don't understand that the machinery doesn't distinguish between malice and ignorance. It just responds. That evening, my mother called again. This time, she didn't ask how I was. She asked why my sister was so upset. I told her to stay out of it. She said she couldn't. Families don't work that way. I told her the military doesn't work that way either. She didn't like that answer. The next day, my sister showed up at my apartment without warning. I opened the door far enough to see her expression. Determined. Not angry. Certain. That was worse. I just want to talk, she said. We're talking now, I replied, keeping my body between her and the door. She looked past me into my living room like she was checking for evidence. You live like a ghost, she said. No pictures. No records. No proof of anything. I live like someone who moves a lot, I said. She crossed her arms. I gave you a chance. That wasn't a chance, I said. That was a demand. Her voice hardened. You don't get to shut me out and then act surprised when I look elsewhere. I asked her directly what she planned to do. She hesitated just long enough to tell me she'd already decided. There's a process, she said, for reporting concerns. I looked it up. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. Not fear. Recognition. You reported me, I said. She lifted her chin. I raised concerns. To the Pentagon, I said. She didn't deny it. She said it wasn't personal. She said it was procedural. She said if I was clean, this would all blow over. She said I should be thanking her for forcing transparency. I told her to leave. She hesitated again like she expected me to argue. When I didn't, she turned and walked down the hallway, heels sharp against the tile, confident in the way only people who think they've done the right thing can be. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against it for a moment, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I needed to recalibrate. At work the next morning, the first sign arrived quietly. An email from my security officer. Neutral tone. Routine language. Request for availability. No accusations, no explanations. Just a calendar invite with a location I recognized and a time that wasn't optional. I accepted it without comment. By midday, the ripple had spread just enough to be noticeable. A meeting moved. A call was postponed. Nothing dramatic. Just the subtle tightening of access that happens when a file is flagged and no one wants to be the person who touches it too much. I kept working. That afternoon, my sister texted me. See, nothing happened. Told you it was fine. I didn't answer. The calendar invite updated an hour later. The location changed. The meeting was no longer at my building. It was downtown. At home that night, I laid out what I'd need in the morning. ID wallet. Phone. The one phone I was allowed to bring. I left the other where it always stayed. My sister called again. I let it ring. She texted instead. You're being dramatic. I turned the phone face down. The thing about reporting someone to the Pentagon is that you don't get to decide how seriously they take it. You don't get to control who reads the file. And you don't get to walk it back once it's in the system. My sister thought she was pushing a button. She didn't realize she'd pulled a lever. I stepped off the metro and adjusted my jacket, checking the address one more time, even though I already knew where I was going. The building didn't look dramatic. No flags out front. No guards shouting orders. Just a clean federal facade designed to disappear into the rest of the city. That was intentional. Places that matter don't need to announce themselves. Inside security was efficient and quiet. I handed over my ID. No small talk. No sideways looks. My name was already in the system. That was the first confirmation that my sister's concern hadn't landed in some forgotten inbox. I followed the signs, took the elevator, and waited in a neutral room with gray chairs and a table bolted to the floor. No windows, no clock. The kind of space meant to keep people from guessing how long they'd been there. I sat straight, hands folded, breathing steady. This wasn't my first interview. It was just the first one that came from outside my normal chain. The interviewer arrived without ceremony. Middle-aged, plain suit, no visible rank. The kind of person whose authority comes from paperwork, not volume. He introduced himself, confirmed my name, and explained the process in a voice so calm it bordered on bored. This was routine for him. That was comforting in its own way. He started with basic questions: employment history, addresses, travel dates. I answered without elaboration. Dates, locations, nothing extra. The system doesn't reward creativity. He asked about my finances. I explained them. He asked about my contacts. I listed what I was permitted to list. He asked about unexplained absences. I referenced orders on file. He nodded, typing as I spoke. Then the tone shifted. Not sharply. Just enough. "We received a report," he said, not looking up. "From a family member." I didn't react. The report alleged inconsistencies, lifestyle mismatches, behavioral concerns. The language was careful, but the intent was clear. Someone had taken public talking points and arranged them into something that looked official. He asked if I was aware of the report. I said yes. He asked if I had anything to add. I said no. That surprised him. Most people rush to explain. I didn't. Everything I could say was already documented somewhere more appropriate. He paused, scrolled, read. "Your sister," he said, glancing up. She seemed convinced she was helping. "I'm sure she was," I replied. He didn't smile. He continued. Asked about stress, about isolation, about whether I felt supported. I answered honestly but briefly. I didn't volunteer emotion. Emotional narratives confuse factual reviews. Halfway through, he stopped typing. "Give me a moment," he said, standing. "I need to verify something." He left the room. I stayed where I was. Still. The chair was uncomfortable in a way that was almost intentional. I focused on posture, breathing, nothing to betray nerves I didn't have. When he returned, his demeanor had changed. Not alarmed, not aggressive, just more careful. He asked a few questions again, slightly rephrased. Chain of command, reporting structure, oversight. I answered the same way I had before. Consistency matters. He leaned back in his chair, studied me. "You understand why this was flagged," he said. "I understand why it was submitted," I replied. "That's not the same thing." He acknowledged that with a nod. Then he said something that hadn't been on the script. "I'm going to need to pull the full file." I didn't move. "There may be a delay," he added, "depending on access." "That's fine," I said. He left again, this time longer. While I waited, my phone buzzed once in my bag. I didn't look. I already knew who it was. The interviewer came back with a tablet instead of a notebook. He didn't sit right away. He skimmed something on the screen, brow furrowed, then looked at me with a different expression entirely. Professional, controlled, but alert. "I'm going to ask you to wait here," he said. "I need to consult with someone." I nodded. He left the door closed behind him. Minutes passed. No footsteps, no voices. The silence was heavy but familiar. I'd spent enough time in quiet rooms to know when it meant nothing and when it meant everything. Eventually, he returned, this time with another person. A woman, older, higher up. She didn't introduce herself to me. She introduced herself to him. They spoke briefly, just out of earshot. Low voices. Controlled urgency. The woman looked to see for the first time then. Really looked. Not like a suspect. Like an asset being double-checked. She asked me to confirm my name again. Then my position. Then she said something that reframed the entire room. This interview is no longer being conducted under standard review parameters. The interviewer stiffened slightly. He nodded, adjusted his tablet. The woman continued. "The scope has changed." I asked if I needed to do anything differently. She shook her head. "No. You're doing exactly what you should." She turned to the interviewer. "We'll need to reclassify." He looked at his screen, then back at her. "Understood." I watched the exchange without comment. This was no longer about my sister's accusations. The report had done what reports do. It triggered a process. That process had now intersected with something else. The woman asked one final question. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't friendly. "Did your family know what they were initiating when they submitted this?" "No," I said. "They thought it was a complaint." She nodded once. That's usually the case. She left the room without another word. The interviewer sat back down slower this time, more deliberate. "We'll need to pause here," he said. "There will be additional steps." "Understood," I replied. He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, this isn't going the way your sister probably expected." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like commentary. When the interview officially ended, I was escorted out through a different hallway than the one I'd come in through. Not dramatic, just efficient. Outside, the air felt sharper, colder, like the city had shifted a degree while I was inside. I checked my phone at last. 4 missed calls, 3 texts. She'd written any update then. This is probably stressful, but it's for the best. Then let me know when you're done. I slipped the phone back into my bag without answering and walked toward the metro entrance, blending back into the flow of people who had no idea what had just been set in motion. From the outside, it probably looked like nothing had happened. Inside the system, something had already moved. The chair across from me scraped softly against the floor as the interviewer sat back down, tablet resting flat on the table this time instead of angled toward me. "We're going to continue," he said, tone neutral, "but we're adjusting the order." I nodded. Adjustments happen when assumptions stop holding. He asked me to confirm basic details again. Name, rank, assignment branch. Nothing new, but repetition in these settings isn't about memory. It's about alignment. Answers that stay consistent under pressure tell their own story. Then he changed direction. "Your family was contacted as part of this review," he said. "Specifically, the reporting party." I kept my face still. I assumed they would be. They provided additional context, he continued. Lifestyle observations. Behavioral concerns. He didn't look at me when he said it. He was reading. I waited. He tapped the screen once. "Your sister described you as withdrawn, financially inconsistent, unwilling to explain extended absences." "That sounds like her," I said. He glanced up, evaluating whether I was being dismissive. I wasn't. Tone matters. She also stated, he added, that she believed your silence indicated risk. I took a breath. Silence isn't risk, it's compliance. He paused, considering that. Then he nodded, almost to himself. "We asked her to elaborate," he said. She did. That was new information. "My sister doesn't elaborate unless she thinks she's winning." He asked if I wanted to review her statements. I said no. Nothing in them would help me, and reacting to accusations gives them weight. Instead, I asked him a question. "Did she provide evidence," I said, "or impressions?" He smiled faintly at that. "Mostly impressions." "That tracks," I replied. The interview shifted again, this time into territory that would normally feel uncomfortable for someone without context. Questions about my movements. Why certain periods weren't documented in the same way others were. Why some supervisors appeared and disappeared from my records without explanation. I answered carefully. Some things I could clarify. Others I referenced back to existing documentation. At one point he stopped me. "You understand," he said, "that from the outside this can look irregular." "I understand," I said. "That's why there are layers." He acknowledged that with another nod. Then he swiped on the tablet and froze. Not dramatically. Just long enough to notice. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing slightly. This wasn't included in the initial packet. I didn't ask what he meant. He scrolled again. Slower this time. "This section is restricted," he said. "I'll need authorization." He stood up without waiting for a response and left the room again. I sat there, hands resting on my knees, listening to my own breathing. This wasn't the part that made people nervous. This was the part where the system checked itself. When he came back, his posture had changed. Straighter, more deliberate. "I have clearance to proceed," he said. He placed the tablet flat between us, angled slightly away from me, like the information on it carried weight he didn't want to mishandle. "We're going to review the annex," he said. "I'll ask questions as needed." I said nothing. He read silently for longer than I expected. His expression didn't change much, but small things did. The way his jaw set. The way his finger hovered instead of tapping. At one point, he exhaled through his nose and looked up. "This explains the gaps," he said. "Yes," I replied. He continued reading. The room felt smaller, not because of tension, but because the air had shifted. The questions that followed weren't accusatory anymore. They were confirmatory. He wasn't looking for mistakes. He was making sure the right safeguards were still intact. He asked me to confirm a reporting channel. Then another. Then whether I'd been briefed on specific containment protocols. I answered each one. He stopped again, then did something that surprised me. He locked the tablet. "I'm suspending this line of questioning," he said. "Understood," I replied. He looked at me directly. "This review is no longer centered on you." I waited. "The concern now," he continued, "is how this was triggered." There it was, the pivot. He explained in careful language that certain reports create ripple effects, not because they're accurate, but because of what they touch. When someone files a concern using specific terminology, it activates a sequence that doesn't care about intent. I asked him what that meant for my sister. He didn't answer directly. It means we're obligated to understand the origin. A knock came at the door. Another official entered, briefly handed him a folder, and left. He flipped through it quickly. "Your sister is waiting," he said. "She's under the impression this is still a standard clarification." I pictured her in a neutral waiting area somewhere in the building, confident, composed, probably rehearsing the same talking points she'd already delivered. He watched my face for a reaction. There wasn't one. "She's about to be asked." He continued to explain how she knew which terms to use. I said nothing. He leaned back. "That's not an accusation," he added. "It's a process question." "I understand the difference," I said. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Most people don't." The door opened again. This time, voices followed. Familiar cadence. My sister's voice carries confidence even when it's misplaced. She stepped into the room and stopped short when she saw me. "Oh," she said, smiling, too quickly. "You're still here." I didn't respond. The interviewer gestured for her to sit. She did, setting her bag neatly at her feet, like she was attending a meeting she'd scheduled herself. "We have a few follow-up questions," he said. "Of course," she replied. "I'm happy to help." He asked her to walk through her report. She did, repeating concerns with practiced clarity. She framed everything as worry, as duty, as common sense. Then he asked her something she wasn't expecting. "How did you become familiar with the reporting framework you used?" She blinked. "I researched it." "Where?" "Online," she said. "Public sources." He nodded. "Which ones?" She hesitated. "Just a beat." He waited. She named a site, then another. The second one wasn't public. I watched her realize it as she said it. The flicker of doubt, the tightening around her eyes. He didn't react. He simply wrote it down. "Thank you," he said. "That will be all for now." She looked at me confused. "That's it for today," he replied. She stood smoothing her jacket. "See," she said to me, smiling again. "Told you it would be fine." I met her eyes for the first time since she'd walked in. Neither of us said anything. After she left, the interviewer closed the door carefully. "We're going to need the complete file," he said. "It's already been accessed," I replied. He shook his head. "Not the part I'm talking about." He reopened the tablet, tapped twice, and scrolled to a section that hadn't been visible before. "This," he said quietly, "changes how we proceed." I leaned back in my chair. Posture unchanged, as the interview took on a gravity my sister had never imagined when she decided to press send. The interviewer slid the tablet closer to himself and lowered his voice, not because anyone else could hear, but because some habits don't turn off easily. "We're adjusting scope," he said. Effective immediately. I felt the change before he finished the sentence. Not emotionally, structurally. The room had crossed an invisible line. He tapped a few icons on the screen, then turned it so I could see just the header. No details. Just a designation that hadn't been there before. "This interview is now reclassified," he said. "Anything discussed from this point forward is restricted." I nodded once. He asked me to place my phone on the table. I did. He didn't touch it, just noted where it was. He asked if I had any other devices. I said no. That was true. The door opened again. The woman from earlier returned, this time alone. She didn't sit. She stood near the wall, arms relaxed, posture alert. She addressed the interviewer, not me. "We've confirmed access parameters." He acknowledged her. "Thank you." She turned to me. "This isn't punitive," she said. "It's corrective." "I understand," I replied. She studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "Good." The interviewer resumed, but the questions were different now. No more lifestyle speculation. No more surface-level concern. He asked about reporting chains, oversight intervals, and escalation thresholds. The kind of questions you only ask when the answers matter beyond the room. I answered each one carefully. No filler, no justification, just facts. At one point, he paused. "Your family had no visibility into this," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," I replied. "They couldn't have," he said, "even if they tried." "That's correct." He leaned back, exhaled slowly. "Then the concern isn't your conduct." "No," I said again. He glanced at the woman by the wall. She gave a small nod. The concern, he continued, is how someone outside the system came close enough to activate it. I didn't comment. The system doesn't need encouragement. There was a knock at the door. A different staffer stepped in, handed the woman a folder, and left. She flipped it open, scanned the contents, then closed it without changing expression. Your sister is being interviewed separately, she said. I didn't ask where. I didn't need to. She's surprised, the interviewer added. She expected a confirmation, not a follow-up. That sounds right, I said. He allowed himself a brief, humorless smile. She's discovering that process doesn't care about confidence. They stepped out together, leaving me alone again. The quiet this time felt different. Not heavier, more focused. Like a system narrowing its attention. When they returned, the woman spoke first. We'll be documenting this as an improper use of reporting channels. I nodded. It doesn't mean she intended harm, she continued. But intent isn't the metric. I said nothing. The interviewer added, her statements are now part of a separate review. Understood. He looked at me for a moment, then asked, did you anticipate this outcome? No, I said. I anticipated procedure. That answer seemed to satisfy him. He explained what would happen next in broad terms. Not consequences. Steps. Documentation. Review. Containment. Words that sound benign until you understand what they do over time. At one point he stopped and looked directly at me. You're aware this will affect your assignment? Yes. How do you feel about that? I considered the question. It's acceptable. He raised an eyebrow. Most people would be upset. Most people aren't prepared for their family to misunderstand their job, I said. The woman by the wall shifted slightly. Prepared or not, she said, this changes your exposure profile. I expected that, I replied. She nodded. Good. There was movement in the hallway. Voices. My sister's voice again, sharper now. Frustrated. The interviewer stood. I need to address something. He stepped out, closing the door behind him. I sat alone, hands folded, listening to muffled conversation through thick walls. I couldn't make out words, but I didn't need to. Tone carries through insulation. Confusion. Pushback. The sound of someone realizing they weren't in control of the room anymore. When he returned, his expression was neutral again, but his pace had changed. She's asking for clarification, he said. About what? About why she's being questioned. I didn't respond. She believes this has gone beyond what she intended. That's usually when it does, I said. He gave a small nod. She asked if you requested this. I met his eyes. I didn't request anything. I know, he said. We told her that. I imagined the look on her face when she heard it. The realization that this wasn't something I'd orchestrated. That the system hadn't sided with me. It had simply done its job. The woman checked her watch. We're done here for now, she said to the interviewer. He turned to me. You're free to go. I stood, collected my phone, adjusted my jacket. As I reached the door, he added, for what it's worth, your restraint helped. I paused. That's what it's for. Outside, the city felt louder than before. Traffic, voices, movement. I walked without urgency, letting the rhythm settle back in. My phone buzzed as I crossed the street. A text from my sister. Why are they asking me these questions? I didn't answer. Another message followed almost immediately. This wasn't supposed to happen. I stopped at the corner, waited for the light, and slipped the phone back into my pocket without responding. Across town, in rooms designed to be unremarkable, paperwork was already being filed under categories my sister had never imagined when she decided to intervene. She thought she'd exposed a problem. What she'd actually done was place herself inside one. I unlocked my apartment, dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, and noticed the red light blinking on my phone before I even took my jacket off. 6 missed calls, all from my sister. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I didn't need to. Panic sounds the same no matter who's speaking. At work the next morning, the change was subtle but unmistakable. My access still worked, but the usual background noise around my role had gone quiet. Fewer emails, fewer side requests. The kind of silence that means people have been told without being told to give something space. My supervisor asked me to step into her office. She didn't close the door all the way. That mattered. I'm not here to ask you questions, she said before I sat down. I'm here to tell you what not to do. I waited. Don't contact your family about this, she continued. Don't explain. Don't clarify. Don't reassure. I wasn't planning to, I said. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. Good. Because this isn't about smoothing things over. She told me carefully and without specifics that the reporting party's statements were being reviewed for accuracy and sourcing. That when someone outside the system demonstrates familiarity with internal language, it creates a different kind of concern. It's not about what they accused you of, she said. It's about how they tried to prove it. That tracked. When I returned to my desk, my phone buzzed again. A text this time. They're treating me like I did something wrong. I didn't respond. Another message followed. I was trying to protect you. I exhaled slowly and turned the phone face down. By midday, the ripple had reached the rest of the family. My mother called. My aunt left a voicemail. A cousin sent a message asking if everything was okay because things sounded serious. I ignored all of it. In the afternoon, I was asked to relocate temporarily. Different floor, different workspace, same job, same expectations. The move wasn't disciplinary, it was procedural. Containment doesn't require guilt. As I packed a small box with my notebook and a framed photo I barely remembered taking, my sister called again. This time I answered. What is happening? She demanded, skipping any pretense. They're asking questions, I said. About me, she snapped. Why are they asking me questions? Because you submitted a report, I replied. Reports get reviewed. That's not what I meant, she said. They're acting like I did something dangerous. I leaned against the edge of the desk. Did you? No, she said quickly. I followed the process. You followed a process I corrected, not your process. She went quiet for a moment, then said, They asked me how I knew what to say. I didn't answer. They asked me where I learned the terminology. She continued. Why would they ask that? Because words matter, I said. Her voice dropped. They asked if anyone helped me. Did they? I asked. She hesitated. That was answer enough. I didn't mean to cause trouble, she said. I thought this would be simple. That's the mistake, I replied. You thought it was simple. She raised her voice. You could fix this. You could tell them it was a misunderstanding. I didn't break anything, I said. There's nothing for me to fix. She scoffed. So you're just going to let them do this to me? I'm going to let them do their job, I said. The line went dead. An hour later, my supervisor stopped by again. This time she closed the door. They're expanding the review, she said. Not because of you. Because of inconsistencies in the reporting party's explanations. I nodded. She's been cooperative, my supervisor added. But cooperation isn't the same as clarity. I understood the difference. She keeps referencing public sources that don't exist, she continued. Or existed at one point and were taken down. That raises questions. About access, I said. About exposure, she corrected. When I left work that day, my sister was waiting in the parking lot. I saw her before she saw me. Arms folded, phone in hand, jaw set. You're avoiding me, she said as soon as I got close enough. Yes, I replied. She stepped in front of my car door. You're letting them tear me apart. No one's tearing you apart, I said. They're asking you to explain your actions. She laughed sharp and humorless. Explain what? That I was worried about, my sister. That you used language you shouldn't have known, I said. That you escalated something you didn't understand. She pointed at me. This is because of you. If you just told me what you do, if I'd violated protocol, I interrupted, I'd be the one sitting where you are now. She stared at me, eyes searching my face for something that wasn't there. They asked me if I've ever spoken to anyone overseas, she said quietly. Why would they ask that? Because they don't know what you know, I replied. And now they need to. Her confidence cracked then. Just slightly. Enough to see the fear underneath. I didn't mean for this to get so big, she said. I know, I replied. That doesn't change anything. She stepped back, hands shaking now. They told me not to contact you anymore. I nodded. They told me the same. She laughed again, softer this time. So that's it. They just cut us off. They create distance, I said. Distance creates clarity. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me. You're cold, she said. No, I replied. I'm disciplined. That night I cooked dinner and ate at the counter, the TV on, but muted. My phone stayed face down. No new messages came through. Somewhere across the city, my sister was answering questions she'd never expected to hear from people who didn't care about her intentions, only her reach. For the first time in her life, she wasn't steering the conversation. She was reacting to it, and the system was still moving. The badge reader flashed green, but the door didn't unlock right away, just long enough to remind me that nothing moves at the same speed once attention shifts. Inside, my temporary workspace felt deliberately plain. No personal items, no familiar rhythms, just a desk, a terminal, and a schedule that had been scrubbed of anything unnecessary. I logged in and went to work without comment. The best way to survive scrutiny is to remain boring. By mid-morning, the updates started arriving indirectly. A meeting request canceled. Another one postponed pending review. No explanations attached. People don't explain when they're being told to wait. My supervisor stopped by once, leaned against the doorframe and said, "You're clear on your side." That hasn't changed. I nodded. I didn't think it would. She watched me for a moment. "Your sister's situation is more complicated." That was the first time anyone had referred to it as a situation. "What kind?" I asked. "The kind that doesn't resolve quickly," she replied. "There's a difference between reporting concern and manufacturing context." I returned to my screen. I imagine she's learning that. "She is my supervisor," said, "and she's not handling it well." By lunch, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring. It rang again. Then a voicemail icon appeared. I didn't listen. An hour later, another call came through. Same number. This time I answered. "This is Agent Keller," a man said. "Professional, neutral. I'm following up regarding a reporting party connected to your file." I waited. "We don't need anything from you," he continued. "This isn't a request, just an advisory." About what I asked. "There may be attempts to reframe previous statements," he said. "If that happens, do not engage." "I won't," I said. He paused. "She's reaching out to people she believes can help." "People like that rarely can," I replied. Another pause. Then correct. After the call ended, I sat back and considered how fast the roles had flipped. Not dramatically, not publicly, but in ways that matter. My sister had always believed information was leverage, that if she gathered enough of it, she could force outcomes. She never considered what happens when the information isn't hers to manage. That afternoon, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door and saw her standing there, purse clutched tight, expression caught somewhere between worry and irritation. "They won't tell me anything," she said without greeting. "They just keep saying it's under review." I stepped aside to let her in. She sat on the couch like she was afraid it might move. "Your sister's been calling me nonstop," she continued. "She says she's being treated like a criminal." "She isn't," I said. "She's being assessed." My mother shook her head. "She was just trying to help you." "She was trying to control me," I replied. "That's not fair." "It's accurate." My mother pressed her lips together. "Can't you say something? Explain that she didn't mean any harm." "I don't have that authority," I said. "And even if I did, it wouldn't matter." She looked at me sharply. "So you're just going to let this happen?" "I'm not letting anything happen," I said. "I'm staying out of it." She stood abruptly. "Family doesn't do this to each other." I met her eyes. "Family doesn't file reports like that either." She left without another word. The next morning, the consequences became tangible. My sister's company announced an internal audit. Not because of the investigation directly, but because questions had started coming in from places that don't usually ask twice. Contracts were put on hold. Meetings delayed. "Out of an abundance of caution" became the phrase of the week. She texted me from a new number. "They froze one of our accounts." I didn't respond. Another message followed. "They're asking about my contacts, about trips I took years ago." Still nothing from me. By the end of the day, her tone shifted again. I didn't know this would affect my job. That one almost got a response. Almost. Instead, I turned my phone off and finished my work. I stayed late, not because I needed to, but because leaving early invites questions. When I finally went home, there was an envelope taped to my door. No return address. Inside was a letter from her lawyer. Careful language, no accusations. A request for cooperation. An implication that things could be smoothed over. I set it on the counter and made dinner. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd spent years dismissing my career as small and unimportant. Now she was asking it to save her. At work the following day, the tone shifted again. Not toward me. Around me. People stopped making small talk when I walked by. Not out of suspicion, out of respect for boundaries. The kind of respect you earn when others are told quietly not to interfere. My supervisor called me in one last time that week. "They've decided to separate your file entirely," she said. "No cross-reference going forward." "That's clean," I said. "It's necessary," she replied. "Your family dynamic created exposure." "I understand." She hesitated. "There's one more thing." I waited. They may recommend a transfer, she said. Not as punishment, as mitigation. I considered that. I assumed as much. She studied my face. You're handling this better than most. I'm not handling it, I said. I'm letting it run. That evening, my sister left a voicemail I didn't delete right away. Her voice was different now. Quieter. Careful. They told me not to contact you, she said. But I don't know who else to talk to. She paused, then added, I didn't think this would end like this. I listened to it once, then deleted it. Family revenge stories never look like revenge when you're inside them. They look like patience, like silence, like choosing not to interfere while systems do exactly what they were designed to do. My sister thought she'd pulled authority into our argument. She didn't realize authority doesn't take sides. It just removes people who shouldn't be standing where they are. I signed the transfer paperwork with the same pen I used for routine forms, pressing just hard enough to leave a clean impression. The officer across the desk didn't rush me. He waited until I set the pen down and slid the folder back. This isn't a demotion, he said. It's a realignment. I know, I replied. He nodded. Different unit. Different exposure. Same expectations. That works. He watched my face like he was checking for disappointment. There wasn't any. I'd already adjusted my internal map. The system prefers people who adapt without commentary. When I stood to leave, he added, You won't be briefed on what happens to the reporting party. I wasn't expecting to be, I said. Outside the office, the hallway felt the same as always. Fluorescent lights, neutral walls, people moving with purpose. Whatever turbulence existed was contained elsewhere behind doors designed to absorb it. At my desk, I packed again, this time more thoroughly. Fewer personal items than most people. I've never needed much. A notebook, a charger, a coffee mug I'd forgotten was even mine. I left the rest. Objects don't anchor me the way they do others. My phone vibrated once as I zipped the bag. Unknown number. I answered. Madeline, my mother said, voice tight. Please don't hang up. I stayed silent. They're saying they can't discuss it, she continued. They won't tell us what's happening with your sister. She's barely sleeping. I waited. She says this is ruining her life, my mother added. Her job, her reputation, everything. I didn't do this, I said. She was trying to protect you. No, I replied. She was trying to manage me. My mother sighed. Can't you call someone? Explain that this went too far. I didn't decide how far it went, I said. I just didn't interfere. That sounds like the same thing. It isn't, I replied. There was a long pause. Then quieter. They told her not to contact you anymore. That's appropriate. You're really going to let this end our family, she said. I closed my eyes briefly. This didn't start with me. She didn't argue. That told me she knew it was true. When the call ended, I turned my phone off and slid it into my bag. The building hummed around me unchanged. The next few days moved quickly. Orientation. Clearances updated. Access restricted, then restored, along a different path. The military doesn't erase you. It reroutes you. In my new workspace, I was introduced without ceremony. No backstory, no explanation. Just a name and a role. That's how I prefer it. Clean edges. No lingering questions. By midweek, the fallout reached a new stage. My sister's lawyer emailed again, this time with softer language. Cooperation. Clarification. A hope to resolve misunderstandings. I forwarded it to the appropriate office and archived the thread. I didn't reply. She tried a different approach that evening. A handwritten note left with a neighbor. Apologetic. Careful. Framed as regret, not responsibility. I didn't read it all the way through. I didn't need to. At work, a colleague asked me if I was settling in okay. I said yes. That was enough. In environments like this, curiosity is usually professional, not personal. An internal memo went out the next morning. Nothing dramatic. A reminder about reporting protocols. Proper use. Consequences for misuse. It wasn't about my sister by name. It didn't need to be. Systems communicate through implication. By Friday, the calls stopped. The silence wasn't relief. It was recalibration. That night, I cooked a simple meal and ate it standing at the counter the way I do when I don't feel like turning the evening into an event. I washed the plate, dried. Set it back in the cabinet. Normal things. Grounding things. My phone buzzed once after I turned it back on. A message from my sister. I shouldn't have done that. No explanation. No excuses. Just the sentence. I stared at it for a moment, then typed a response and deleted it before sending. There was nothing I could say that would help her or protect me. I blocked the number. The next morning I ran before sunrise. Same route. Same pace. The city was quiet in that early, honest way it gets before people start narrating their lives. My breathing settled into rhythm. My thoughts stayed where they belonged. At work, my supervisor checked in briefly. "You're clear," she said. "On all fronts." "Good," I replied. "There may be long-term consequences for your family," she added. "Financial. Professional." I assumed there would be. She studied me. "You're comfortable with that?" "I'm comfortable with boundaries," I said. She nodded once. That's a rare thing. Later that day, I was asked to confirm travel availability. Short notice. New destination. Nothing unusual. I confirmed without hesitation. As I gathered my things, I noticed something I hadn't before. The weight of the situation had shifted entirely. Not lifted. Shifted. It was no longer mine to manage. It belonged to processes that move slower than emotion and faster than regret. On my way out, I passed a waiting area and caught a glimpse of someone I recognized. Not my sister. A colleague of hers. Eyes tired. Shoulders tense. The look of someone who hadn't realized how wide the net was until it tightened. We didn't acknowledge each other. Outside, the air was cool and clear. I adjusted my jacket and headed toward the transit stop, merging into the flow of people ending their workday, each carrying something they didn't talk about. My sister thought reporting me would force me to explain myself. What it actually did was remove me from the conversation entirely. The system doesn't argue. It doesn't persuade. It doesn't forgive. It just moves forward and expects you to keep up. I folded the last shirt into the duffel and zipped it halfway, leaving room for the things I'd forgotten I'd need once I was already gone. The apartment looked the same as it always had. Clean. Sparse. Nothing that suggested permanence. That was intentional. I'd learned early not to root myself in places that could change overnight. My phone buzzed on the counter. One notification. No name attached. I didn't pick it up right away. The transfer briefing had been short. New location. New schedule. Fewer variables. More distance. Not a promotion. Not a punishment. Just a correction the system makes when something introduces unnecessary exposure. Before I left, my supervisor had given me one final update. Not details. Just enough context to understand the shape of things. "They've closed your portion," she said. "Permanently." "And the rest?" I asked. She paused. "Ongoing." That was all she said. It was all she needed to. I picked up my phone and opened the message. It was from my sister's lawyer again. Shorter this time, less confident. An acknowledgement that further contact would be inappropriate. A request to route any future communication through counsel. I deleted it. Outside, the street was quiet. Early morning traffic moved in loose patterns. Drivers focused on destinations that felt important to them. I loaded the bag into the trunk and sat behind the wheel for a moment longer than necessary, letting the familiar routine ground me. Control is a strange thing. People think it comes from authority or money, or knowing the right words. My sister believed that if she gathered enough information, she could bend outcomes toward herself. She didn't realize that the moment she reached for leverage, she exposed her own grip. At work, the shift was immediate and total. No one asked about my family. No one hinted. My name appeared on lists it hadn't been on before. Travel orders came through cleanly. Access aligned with need, and nothing more. The kind of clarity that only comes after noise is removed. On my second day of the new role, an analyst I'd never met leaned over and asked, "You settling in, okay?" "Yes," I said. "That's good," he replied, and went back to his screen. That was the entire exchange. No curiosity, no backstory, just function. Later that afternoon, I received a call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. An hour later, another call came through. Then a text. "Please call me." I waited until evening, then replied with a single sentence. "I'm unavailable." The response came quickly. "This has gone too far." I stared at the words for a moment, then turned the phone off again. Far away from my new office, the consequences continued to unfold without my involvement. My sister's company lost 2 contracts pending review. Not canceled. Pending. The most dangerous word in corporate language. Meetings were postponed. Partners went quiet. Questions multiplied. She didn't call me. She wasn't allowed to. Instead, I heard about it through distance, through tone shifts, through the way people stopped mentioning her name in the same breath as certainty. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd spent years asserting control through proximity, through insistence, through the belief that being family entitled her to access. Now she had none. One evening, a message appeared in my inbox from an internal address. Not about her, about policy. A reminder of boundaries, appropriate channels, consequences of misuse. It was generic enough to apply to anyone. It didn't need to say her name. I cooked dinner and I ate it slowly this time, sitting at the table instead of standing. The routine felt earned. Outside, the city moved on without noticing the quiet corrections happening inside it. The next morning, I passed through security and was waved through without pause. The guard nodded once, eyes already moving to the next person in line. Trust when it's intact, looks like that. Invisible. At my desk, a file waited. Not marked urgent. Just there. I opened it and scanned the first page. It wasn't about the investigation. It was about the future. Planning, projections, work that assumed continuity. I smiled just slightly. My sister had once told me I lived like a ghost. She'd meant it as an insult. What she didn't understand was that ghosts don't leave fingerprints. They move through systems without triggering alarms. Later that day, my mother called again. I answered this time. "She's not doing well," she said immediately. "She doesn't understand how this happened." I listened. "She keeps saying she was trying to help," my mother continued. "That she never meant for things to spiral." "I know," I said. There was a pause. "Is there anything you can do?" "No," I replied. And there never was. "You're her sister," my mother said, like it was a final argument. "And I'm a professional," I said. "Those roles don't overlap." Silence stretched on the line. "She lost control," my mother said quietly. "Yes," I replied. "That's what happens when you try to use systems you don't belong to." After the call ended, I returned to my work. Numbers, patterns, decisions that mattered to people who would never know my name. That was the job. It always had been. Weeks passed, then months. The situation settled into its new shape. My sister wasn't ruined. The system doesn't ruin people. It removes options. It narrows paths. It leaves you with the consequences of your choices and the space to sit with them. I didn't hear from her again. Sometimes I wondered if she understood what she'd really lost. Not contracts, not status, control. The ability to frame the story. The belief that she could reach into my life and rearrange it. She couldn't. As I walked out of the building one evening, badge clipped back into place, I caught my reflection in the glass. Same uniform, same posture, same calm I'd carried through all of it. My sister thought reporting me to the Pentagon would force me into the open. What it did was close the distance she'd been using against me. And in the end, that distance was the only thing that ever kept me safe. I didn't win because I exposed anyone. I won because I didn't react the way they expected. In family revenge stories like this, the real turning point isn't anger or shouting, it's restraint. The moment my sister tried to use the system against me, she revealed exactly who she was. And the system did the rest quietly, efficiently, without needing me to raise my voice once. If you're drawn to stories about family drama, power, consequences, and what happens when people cross lines, they don't understand you're in the right place. These revenge stories aren't about fantasies. They're about real choices, real systems, and real fallout. If you want more family revenge stories like this, especially those rooted in military life and real-world consequences, make sure you subscribe to the channel. New stories are coming and you won't want to miss the next one.